मुझे लगता है कि मुझे यहाँ ये सही जगह है। ओके। अब ठीक है, चलो ठीक है। तो हम 2 मिनट में शुरू करें। तो मुझे बताना कि कब शुरू करना है, तब हम शुरू करेंगे। चलो ठीक। ओके। तुषार सूर्यवंशी ने कहा है कि मैं शुरू कर सकता हूँ। लोग लोग जुड़ते जाएंगे। चलो ठीक है। सबसे पहले आज का जो टॉक होगा वो 2 भाषाओं में होगा, वो हिंदी और अंग्रेजी में होगा। और हमारे जो सुनने वाले जो हमारे साथी हैं, उनकी अगर कोई भी उनको सवाल अगर उनको आए तो कृपया करके चैट बॉक्स में डालें और मुझे बताए कि कौन सी चीज़ की उनको समझ नहीं आई या उसके ऊपर ज़्यादा वो रिफ्लेक्शन चाहते हैं। वी विल डू द नीडफुल। और आज का जो टॉपिक है, सबसे पहले मैं हम हमारे जो साथी हैं जो सम्यक विद्यार्थी आंदोलन से, सत्यशोधक विद्यार्थी आंदोलन से जो जुड़े हुए हैं, उन सभी साथियों को मेरा साधुवाद और आपको बहुत बहुत शुभकामनाएं कि आप इतनी ऑर्गेनाइज्ड तरीके से मूवमेंट चला रहे हैं। मैं आपका फेसबुक पेज, आप ही के फेसबुक पेज से ही देख रहा था कि आप काफ़ी स्पीकर्स को बुला रहे हैं और एक तरह से पैंडमिक का किस तरह से अच्छा उपयोग किया जाए, आपने उसके ऊपर काफ़ी उसको आपने अपनी तरीके से यूज़ करके लोगों के घर तक ये नॉलेज पहुंचाई है। और जो स्पीकर्स है, स्कॉलर्स, इंटेलेक्चुअल्स, एक्टिविस्ट, आर्टिस्ट जो है, वो भी उनको भी आसानी हो गई है क्योंकि अभी ट्रैवल करना मुश्किल है। तो बस घर के अंदर बैठ के, जैसे मैं अपने अपार्टमेंट में बैठ के बॉस्टन से मैं आपको लाइव आ रहा हूँ आपके घरों में। आप शायद भारत की या दुनिया के कोई कोने में हो सकते हैं। आई थिंक द टॉपिक दैट वाज प्रपोज्ड, मेरे जो मित्र है प्रशांत इंगोले, जो आईआईटी में डॉक्टरल स्कॉलर है, वो खुद एक कल्चरल स्टडीज़ के एक्सपर्ट है। उनका अपना एक रिसर्च इस विषय के ऊपर तैयार हो रहा है, हो गया है मेरे हिसाब से, और एक बहुत ही मॉन्यूमेंटल रिसर्च रहेगा। उन्होंने ट्रांसलेशन के ऊपर भी और कल्चरल पॉलिटिक्स के ऊपर भी उनका काफ़ी ज़्यादा इंटरेस्ट है। तो जब उन्होंने, हमारी बात होती रहती है, जब उन्होंने मुझे कहा कि आपको इस विषय के ऊपर बोलना है, तो हमने विषय मुझे दे दिया गया था कि कल्चरल पॉलिटिक्स पर ही बोलूं। तो मुझे भी बहुत अच्छा सवाल ऑलरेडी आ रहे हैं। चलो ठीक है, तो ऐसा करते हैं, वंस वी फिनिश दिस प्रेजेंटेशन, बिकॉज मेरे जो नोट्स है मेरे ये स्क्रीन पर है, तो मैं बार बार उधर देखूंगा। एंड वंस वी फिनिश दिस, देन वी कैन टेक मोर क्वेश्चंस. So the topic that we have today is the anti-caste cultural politics and Dalit political parties. I think there's two. I think the ones who decided this topic had this idea that I should comment on both aspects, and I think that's why they clubbed it together. वो चाहते थे कि मैं इन दो विषयों के ऊपर बोलूँ, और वो किस तरह किया जाए तो उन्होंने उसका सैंडविच बना के कर दिया है, और वो रिलेटेड भी है एक दूसरे के साथ। ऐसा नहीं है कि both are different from each other or both are alien from each other. और ये जो एंटी कास्ट कल्चरल पॉलिटिक्स का डिस्कोर्स है, इसको हम कल्चरल पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ द एंटी कास्ट मूवमेंट भी बोल सकते हैं। और उसके साथ साथ फिर जो दलित पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज़ का रोल है, उसके ऊपर व्हाट इज़ देयर presence, or what is the relation with cultural politics. I think this really merits a good about 40-45 minutes discussion. We will try to cover those many topics as we talk now, and I'm going to give you a very cursory glance. So before I begin the presentation, I will just lay before you a synopsis. So first I will try to foreground what culture means. After that, I will try to talk about how cultural politics kind of comes into being. And then I will talk about how cultural related movements, then there will be emphasis on 3 or rather 4 aspects. One is cultural revolution, cultural politics, cultural terrorism, and of course cultural commodification. Now within this 4 things, I will repeat one more time for those who are asking. Cultural revolution, which comes from cultural politics, cultural terrorism, cultural commodification. Now within this cultural political subsets, or rather independent autonomous, okay, you can't hear me, I have to maybe echo. Within the cultural political sphere, there are 3 to 4 parallel cultural movements that operate, and these could be categorized as cultural movements wherein I described, which is one cultural politics, within the cultural politics, cultural revolution, cultural terrorism, cultural commodification, and of course the one I will come at the very end is cultural appropriation, which could also be part of cultural movement. And I think within the cultural movement phase, we need to we need to sort of delineate these aspects. So let's understand what culture is. Culture, संस्कृति क्या होती है, इसके ऊपर हमको थोड़ा सा ध्यान देने की जरूरत है. तो I think for one to understand culture, one needs to understand history, because for one to establish culture, I think, and this is my interpretation of history, interpretation of culture, we need history, a solid history. The second is we need theory of that history. Then we need art, we need aesthetics, and within that art and aesthetics, we need architecture of the society. And all of these, with the history, with the theory, alongside theory, there are identifiers of art and aesthetics. Then we also need architecture to carry the culture, and to club all of this and practice, we need practitioners, cultural practitioners. So how does then one emphasize the culture that is existing amongst us? Um, you know, so there are two metaphors, culture and tradition. Eric Hobsbawm was a British historian of the 19th century, 18th and 19th century. He worked mostly in 18th, but his work also goes back. But he's a very established historian, and according to Eric Hobsbawm, he talks about when people emphasize constantly tradition. Tradition, when we talk tradition, people usually emphasize on tradition as a given thing, parampara, and so Eric Hobsbawm goes through a understanding of how tradition is manipulated, how tradition is actually creation of the ruling class, and then of course we can go to the public-private culture / sphere of Jürgen Habermas's definition of how public sphere or public spaces are created in this space. Now, within the culture and tradition dichotomy, as I said, culture requires a foregrounding of history, art, aesthetic, theory, and of course the architecture of an entire cultural sphere, which then is practiced by people. And cultural practitioners could be anybody. I think individual is a cultural practitioner. And of course, right now what we have is we have a very stark differentiation between people who practice culture and people who live their normal life, because for us culture has become something very researchable or appreciable topic, whereas I think individual also incorporate their own cultural modalities in their life. Now, within a broader sphere, especially within the European, there were three movements, as we know: a Renaissance of the 14th century, then the Reformation movement, of course, that went through the challenging of church, especially, and again, the center of this somehow was Italy. And Renaissance really challenged the whole. Of course, it was a gap between the quote unquote ancient, medieval, and modern, and for them the modern culture kind of starts from the Renaissance kind of establishment where art and culture was prospered. So what were they doing is they were establishing a formalities of culture, and when they were doing that, they were also putting a benchmark of how a culture needs to be interpreted or reoriented. And within the art or aesthetic and literary movement, of course literature is the outcome of that, but mostly art and architecture, the various schools of thought sort of emerged during this time. And when we see, especially in the formation of Renaissance, that gives in a way for rationalism, and then rationalism is of course a purveyor of enlightenment, but within that Reformation movement, where the separation of church was emphasized, where the absolute authority of Pope or the preacher or the ones who took care of religious affairs of society, and mostly it was villages. And if we talk about European feudal era, that was the dominant societal relations that were established around that feudalism, because as we know, the monarchy existed very, very prominently, and within the monarchical structure there were all these institutions, and that's why within various European movements there is always a focus on feudal peasantry kind of politics, as we come to see later in the 19th century onwards. After Reformation, of course, we have Enlightenment era. So these movements of Europe kind of animate most overwhelmingly the studies of culture. But then if you look through a perspective of non-European sense, there is also a lot that is going on within these cultural patterns. So as I said, this lecture will be divided into two parts. One is, of course, I'll foreground the cultural politics, and then of course we will go to the Dalit cultural political sphere. So within the first segment, as I said, now let's try to see how how does one understand cultural politics, followed by then of course cultural revolution, cultural terrorism, cultural appropriation, but also cultural commodification. And I think these are very important essentials for us to understand what it means, or how we see ourselves. Because I have to say constantly, within a cultural sphere or any other political sphere, you look yourself as a constant mirror. So today what we're going to do is we also constantly mirror our own existence alongside history, but alongside present and future. And through that, the mirroring of self, what we will do is we'll try to find answers, or rather raise more questions to our current predicaments. So first is within the cultural political sphere, cultural politics could be understood through various cultural facets. One is of course popular culture. Then there is a alternative, quote unquote, alternative culture, which doesn't subscribe to the quote unquote popular cultural discourse. Then we have what we have currently is social/media. So we can use together social media culture or social/media culture. And then what we have is a interdisciplinary cultural politics. So these are all parts of how we identify cultural politics. And to understand the cultural political discourse, we have to understand how this forms of cultural varieties operate in our society. Now, popular culture could be easily just a second. Popular culture could be easily understood within the framing of mass culture. So, in a simple language, where it's a production on a mass level, and within this sort of formulation, what has happened is the mass culture was produced with the aim of providing a to begin with, it was an entertainment, but eventually it became a knowledge, and after it became knowledge, then it became a consumption. And I will explain how these three operate. So in ancient societies as well, we can see there were popular forms of cultural modes of entertainment, and these were and these were basically the intellectual knowledge preservoir of various communities, and that's how we see popular culture was performed. And even now in villages and all, when we go, the popular culture is what is performed in open space. It's on the banks of river, or it's probably at the temples, which is where basically entire mass of people congregate without a predetermined hierarchies. Of course, the village hierarchies kicks in, but the purpose of this popular or mass culture is that everybody should be in a position to consume. Everybody should be in the position to be part of the mass. So I think this aspect of being part of a mass is where the whole conduit of popular culture came, and as it graduates through a capitalist economy, then it becomes very alien popular culture, meaning what it does is it tries to segregate itself from a common mass base. And so popular culture, which now we also call mass base, changes the perception, changes the view, and changes the existence of how a mass should look at. Now, one of that examples is how film becomes sort of a popular mass culture, because film is one of the many. We can talk of music and various other forms. What it does is it conditions, it brings people from the open space that was given into a confined space. Because to watch a film, you really need a privacy. You really need a confinement of four walls or the darkness, and all the mind, the way mind operates into this is to be on the cornered or the rectangle spaces that operate. And there is always, of course, the exit sign. So what that says is, you can leave whenever you want to, right? But for that, you will need a direction. You can only exit from this place. In otherwise cultures, you can participate and exit wherever and whenever you want. but within this they discipline you to behave in certain way, almost like a feudal lord. Like we have feudal lords in India, various castes, the Marathas, the Reddis, the Kammas, the Yadavs, whoever have this feudal lords, the one who own land and who control the feudal economy. These castes, in Indian context, control, but what in the so-called pre-modern era, when the cultural consumption was happening, the intellectual knowledge that was given, it was not filtered. It was given the way it was, the way people understood, the way people consumed, and the way people interpreted this formation. But with bringing of this new popular capitalist mass culture or slash popular culture, they confined the habits as well as the freedom that was granted to them. And that is why many times when you see, if you take a child or a toddler to a film, the child is not happy, because the child is not used to the principles and the injunctions of a film cinema, of a capitalist thing. They will cry, they will make noise, and then we are expected to shush, or we are expected to so what does it say is, the mind that is trying to engage with a popular culture has somehow become filtered, and that's why the filtered knowledge comes to us. And the difference is, there is no life, and the screen, which is basically a thread, kind of acts in consonance with that. And now this is one of the ways of understanding popular culture. Of course, we can go larger terms. Now, alternative culture. Now, alternative culture is originally a popular culture, but because of the capitalist interventions, this alternative culture refused to adjust within the mass production of capitalist economy, and that is why they retain and they maintain their own forms, their own original crux of it, where they say fine, and in opposition, when they were claiming their own originality, the popular culture, which now became alternative culture, had to adjust, and that's why then they became either vidrohi, we call protest, or alternative, or there were other kinds of third world, global south, feminists, queer. These are all forms of alternative cultures that were actually mainstream, but now they are trying to create their own space. And I think within this, what happens is this capitalist hierarchy produces its own novel form. Now, third is social media / media culture, and we all know how this operates. And today, this social media culture that I am speaking on live from Harvard, Massachusetts here, and you guys are anywhere in the world. Now, this social media culture has itself given a new perspective to how we consume and how we intellectualize the knowledge that is produced here. And the knowledge is not necessarily someone coming and giving a talk or someone writing a lengthy post. That could be part of knowledge making, but knowledge in the sense of how it is transferred, how it is consumed, and then how it is practiced. That's how we have to understand how this knowledge of social media is presented to us. I can say A, the listener will listen B, and he will perform that as C, or she will perform at C, or they will perform at C. So what happens here is, there is a lot of multi-filters within social media. Now we can argue, and we can we can go about discussing about how social media has removed the barriers, but it not only removed, but it added more layers and filters for us to actually directly consume what it means. And I think that's where people sometimes get it a little bit mistaken, to kind of totally embrace the identity of culture. And social media culture effectively does that, and then social media culture has also given us the ageism kind of reflection. So for example, if you're on TikTok or Snapchat, it is quote unquote traditionally meant for a teenage or a certain age group to be part of that, and similar with other social media groups. And I think within the social media sphere as well, how relationships are evolving, how relationships are changing. And that's why when we talk about relationship, we have to also understand how sex and sexuality is then interpreted through social media promulgations. Because of because of intimate yet not so is the concept that we need to understand. In our social media world, when we send a message, the culture is you should reply in certain time. 20 years ago, it was not possible. You had to send a letter which would take so many months or so many weeks for us to even acknowledge, and then reply will come so many weeks later. So what has happened is the urgency of intimacy has increased. And so what are we seeking right now is immediate gratification. And within this immediate gratification, we have somehow produced a possessive attitude towards our own insecurities. And our insecurities we try to hide or try to manage through our social media engagement. And of course, it's a topic that merits a whole new an independent lecture about how social media as a cultural discourse operates in our society, and there are enormous amounts of intellectual projects that are actually documenting that. Within my understanding of social media, we can go about, and I'm happy to answer on social media instances. And I had written a review of some Greek film which kind of where the parents had kept their kids alien from they said no, the world is, they were Orthodox Greek Christians, and they did not want their children to be part of the society because it was intoxicating, it was bad. So the parents put the child out of all the evils. But what that does is the child also, the parents also then try to set, because the children are young, so they hire a prostitute for their own sexual intercourse. And I think what it does is it kind of produces an internalized, closed economy of body, an economy of desire. And I think this is where we tend to understand, like, this is totally contrast. Today, that can be possible without confining, so that's the kind of alternative world that is presented to us. Now, the next form of cultural politics, or to understand the cultural politics, is through interdisciplinary cultural political lens. And in here we can add caste, class, gender, sexuality, region, you name it. And of course, within the interdisciplinary lens, what it tries to do is it tries to come within the broader framework of popular culture or alternative culture, but it is trying to foreground the voices of the subaltern masses. The subalterns meaning the people or the working class or the oppressed who don't have a space to identify with any of that. So I could be a person who belongs to, let's say, I'm a woman, and I don't have a space in popular or alternative spaces or alternative cultural politics. So maybe interdisciplinary is something I might find my space in. So these are ways how interdisciplinarity kind of played its part into imparting a new form of politics. Now, within the interdisciplinary lens, there was also other modes that operated, which we are discovering day by day, where human freedom and human diversity is prioritized. Meaning, you can be different, and we will value you. Because you are different, we will exclude you, was usually a norm within a political ideologies, political organizing, or any other forms where we find a person who is quote unquote different, and different could be anything. Could be physical attributes, could be ideological attributes, could be sexuality attributes, could be any attributes. What we did is we isolated that person because we are looking for a homogenizing aspects of society. So within the interdisciplinary lens, what it does is it kind of embraces all of the different sense and yet presents a unique form as different but perfect. And I think this kind of ways of formations comes into place. And now, within the anti-caste political sphere, how do we then foreground cultural politics of anti-caste movement, of a community, of a space that was never written about and that was never acknowledged? Now, these are two things. One is not writing and one is not acknowledging. The third, which I will come very later, is how these were appropriated. And I think what we need to understand is, within the anti-caste political sphere, the acknowledgement of the individual and acknowledgement of the group existed, but in the sense of patronizing degradation, meaning I acknowledge a specific caste group, for example the Chamars, or for example the Parias, or the Mangs, or Dusads. I acknowledge them, but not in the sense of they can produce a value to culture. They can produce a value to my economy, but they cannot produce a value to culture. What does that mean is these are low culture people. Why? Because we are high culture people. And that's how you will see Dalits are usually taunted as cultureless. They are low culture people. They are low borns. This is how the origin kind of traces its genealogy too, where within the production economy the value is only attributed to the labor, and that to the labor is of course not compensated as we would expect. Now that is one aspect of looking at the things, the way anti-caste politics, especially the cultural politics of anti-caste movements are there. Because now if they have to form a cultural politics, first of all they need to emphasize that they are unique in a sense that they are not misappropriating or they are not taking away anything from someone else. So the acknowledgement as well as the appropriation kind of takes place alongside of this politics. Now for the Dalit political sphere, for example, one question is, do Dalits have culture? Do they have politics? Do they have a space enough that can grant them a certain form of legitimacy to even claim on their own bodies? And I think this is where it gets interesting, because at least some cultures have been recorded. But within the Dalit political sphere, what has happened is the Bhakti movement brought out a prominent Dalit cultural political sphere. They kept Dalit history alive. As I said, Dalit culture, the culture is history, art, aesthetic, theory, as practitioners. Bhakti movement was all about it. They retained the history, they provided art and aesthetic, they provide an art and aesthetic could be music and other forms. They theorized the existence of their own being as a community, which is not necessarily only theorizing culture, but theorizing the person, theorizing the existential. And of course, they were practitioners. So within this Dalit Bhakti sphere, the Bhakti poetic sphere, they were not necessarily always Dalits. They were also non-Dalits, but yet their concerns were very much rooted to the Dalit question. And of course, we can talk about Tukaram and other whom we have revered as saints, who have actually emphasized the importance of the Dalit cultural political sphere. Now, within the cultural politics, what happens is it gives rise to, as I've discussed before, a few cultural possibilities, and one of the possibilities is cultural revolution. Now, utilizing the culture as a medium of revolution, almost every other country has established its unique identity. Any post-colonial society has done that, and they continue to reinvent their own new cultural uniqueness. Every society needs their own culture to feel proud, to feel that they belong to a certain historical moment, as well as for them to be autonomous and not relying on anyone else. That's why state is so much invested in emphasizing on culture. One of the early examples of cultural revolution could be attributed to, and of course we can go to Venezuela of the 19th century, but in the modern terms, the 1918 but 1923 more so of Russian, the Soviet Revolution, where Lenin actually produced a cultural revolutionary document, and within his political sphere, he wrote this article. I mean, he wrote this article which was titled on cooperation, and within the cooperation form, what it has done is he has produced a simultaneous culture that requires a revolution of societal thinking. And what was it? It was mostly relying on Marxist thinking. Of course, because it was Lenin, it was eventually adopted as a Leninist thinking. And what it did was, it was to change the society's thinking the way it operated before. Before it was very much relying on Tsar, the monarchy, and how the society was relying for everything on the monarchy. They produced things. So if you have to restructure society, you need a reorganizing. And for reorganizing, you need a new cultural politics. And this cultural politics was effectively provided by Lenin, who then, within his article on cooperation, kind of dives deep, but its primary impetus is to give recognition to socialism as a workable method, as a workable model. And to do that, one of the things they did was, of course, to prioritize the proletariats within the politics, and they gave recognition. And they gave recognition to the working class. They gave recognition, of course, within the industrial society, but as well as the feudal society, where they brought them into mainstream. And they said the very vanguardist position, which is a conscious peasant, a conscious proletariat, can then can lead the affair on its own terms. Now, this was a very revolutionary act, because if you are a peasant, now you are told you can rule the bloody country. You can rule the affairs of the country, and then you can be the king, or you can be the premier of your own organization or your country. This was not given before, because as we know, Raja ke pet se Raja, Rani ke pet se Raja paida hota hai. So it's the same attitude was operating. To do that, the cultural revolution was required within and so what they did, they did? One of the first things they did was to remove the influence of churches. They said, church, go home. Church has having too much money. Church had too much influence, and church authenticated the monarchy. So it reduced the influence, and eventually eliminated the not totally eliminated, but literally removed the cultural, the church influence in their life. Church as in religious institutions. So by doing that, what they did was to remove the people out of their own insecure miseries, because especially the peasant class or the poor class, they always look up to God or some external being for their for finding answers to their current problems. The Russian Revolution actually trying to integrate these forms of thinking, and obviously it went into art and literature, and then we can see that model was then easy to promote amongst other institutions. One of the things they could do was within the state planning, which Indian government or Indian state emulated the planning that we have, the 5-year planning. Now it has changed and it's called Niti Aayog and whatnot, but the premise is the same. So within this, what they did was, they said we should distribute the public resources for the wider consumption, and by doing that, what they did was to promote a consumerist society, but which is not tied to excessive obsession of consumerism that was tied to the profits. It was a very different way of looking at the society. But within this consumerist model, eventually, of course, after the Soviets it fell, and they made it excessive consumer society. But the premise was that we have to find a philosophical base to authenticate the Russian cultural revolution. Now then, we have in 1960s the Chinese cultural revolution. I mean, in fact, Chinese revolution led by Mao is only called the cultural revolution. And what did Mao did? Mao basically took that principles of Marxism-Leninism, but also added his own effects, because China is a hugely agrarian society, and for Mao to understand the society, he saw that the cultural oppressors, the people who oppressed were culturally high people, and so for him to change that politics, he had to inculcate a certain form of a radical thinking, which was when the revolution happened, or when it was happening, he emphasized on re-education of masses, and this was again coming from Lenin kind of history. Within the re-education of masses, what they wanted to do was they wanted to pinpoint at the people who were the beneficiaries of people's labor. There is always a class in every country who benefits of someone else's labor, and that class becomes the ruling class of each society. In India, it's the same caste and class people who benefit out of someone else's labor but make it for themselves. Mao said nothing doing. He said if you want to, he actually put all these professors, intellectuals, artists, bureaucrats, and political leaders, he forced them to go and work in farms. He said until unless you understand the conditions of working people, जब तक तुमको जो गांव में काम करने वाले जो लोग हैं, क्योंकि जो तुम्हारी आमदनी बना रहे हैं, जो तुम्हारी इकोनॉमी को डेवलप कर रहे हैं, तुम्हारा वेलफेयर जो आ रहा है वो इनके मेहनत से आ रहा है, जब तक तुमको इनकी कंडीशन समझ में नहीं आएगी किस मेहनत में काम करते हैं, तुम सोसाइटी में ऑपरेट नहीं कर सकते. मोर सो यू कांट बी द intellectual, you can't be the ruler, you can't be the bureaucrat, you have to understand that if you are deciding the art. तो उन्होंने पर्जिंग करना शुरू कर दिया. जो बूर्जुआ जो स्फीयर था, जो एक सेल्फिश एटीट्यूड से जीता था, जो दूसरों के ऊपर अत्याचार को प्रमोट करता था, ऐसे कल्चर को माओ ने बोला कि बंद करो, एंड ही फोर्स्ड ऑल ऑफ देम. एंड उसकी वजह से उसके ऊपर काफ़ी क्रिटिसिज्म भी हुआ था. बट वॉट इट इफेक्टिवली डिड वॉज इट प्रोवाइडेड ए सर्टन ग्राउंड ऑफ अप्रोच. लोगों को अनुभव हो गया. मेरे काफ़ी चाइनीज़ दोस्त हैं जो मिडिल क्लास से आते हैं, जो अमेरिका में है ऑफ कोर्स, तो वो कहते हैं कि उनकी पेरेंट्स की जनरेशन ने काफ़ी सहा है. सो दे डोंट लुक इट एज ए गुड थिंग, दे ऑलवेज लुक इट एज ए सॉर्ट ऑफ नेगेटिव थिंग दैट्स ऑपरेटिंग अगेंस्ट देम. नाउ विद इन चाइनीज कल्चर रेवोल्यूशन व्हाट इट इफेक्टिवली possibly could do was to provide a communist framework of society led by Mao. And communist society, as we know, is everybody equal, and you know, there's no difference in pay. We should give value to labor. The most poor, the most oppressed will be given more recognition in the labor hierarchy, and they will not be treated anything different even if they belong to different class or the sphere of society. After China, within that time, what happens is the societies that are existing, let's say, in the cultural revolutionary politics are usually attributed to Marx or Lenin or Mao. But there are other societies that also produced cultural revolution, which were also significant enough, and which of course gave voice to the oppressed, because cultural revolution meant to do that. And one of that happened in the early 20th century in America, in New York City, in the neighborhood of Harlem, and that's known as Harlem Renaissance, which basically gave fundamental rights of expression and gave a freedom and autonomy for a former slave to be him or herself. And once you are liberated from the shackles of that barriers of your racial and economic barriers, what you do is economic chains. What you do is you go back and embrace your full humanhood, and that full embracing of full humanhood would come in the form of music, would come in the form of literature, would come in the form of theater, would come in the form of various other manifestations of societies, expressions. Now, within these expressions, the society that was attributing to this culture had actually berated. That's why we even now see the hip hop is not appreciated within the mainstream quote unquote white culture. They still call it vulgar, filthy, and all kinds of things. So the alternative sphere that emerged within Harlem Renaissance, it kind of created a spiral effect across the world. And Babasaheb Ambedkar himself was in America when Harlem Renaissance was at its peak, and he was right in Colombia, right where Harlem Renaissance was taking place. So if you walk by one restaurant and you peek into the through the door, you are seeing someone performing jazz, someone singing, someone dancing. So all these new forms came about, and African Americans, former slaves, produced new musical genres like blues, soul music, R&B, rock and roll. All of these emerged from there, and then the new cuisine, the food culture, kind of emerges from the cultural revolution, as we can see. And within this, they also produce new forms of writing, new forms of poetry, which was unheard of. And now, after that, during the same time, the cultural revolution in Latin America, for example, is important, because Latin America again was colonized by two major forces. There were others, but Spaniards and Portuguese, the European colonies, had colonized this vast land. the Spanish as well as the Portuguese cultural sphere influenced a lot of the cultural politics that emerged, and many revolutionaries that came about had the background of Spanish or Portuguese, but not necessarily. The quote indigenous people had their own cultural politics and cultural revolution happening at their place. The Maya people, the Aymara people, and the Quechua people. These were I'm just giving a few examples. There are many across the region, especially in Bolivia. If you go, it's whole indigenous politics. So within the vast land of Latin America, again, we see the cultural revolution comes about without relying on the colonial space. But yet the colonial domination also helps to create a new alternative genres of expressions. The same happens in Africa, and we can talk about, but how African culture is subtle, remains, but then it gets colonized, and then the Europeans try to orientalize it by saying, it's like a thing to be exhibited in museum, and not giving the whole human dignity to their parallels. Now, this was a cursory glance, and I think it was quite a lengthy glance for you to understand the cultural politics operating at the sphere. But also cultural politics, what it does is, it shapes society and public opinions. And we can see through the example that I gave, it literally shaped how people think, how people perceived, how were the perceptions, and how it actually manifested in its own livelihood, in its own formulation, be it in state policy or be it in personal life, be it in the mass production of culture, mass culture, or the popular culture, or any other alternative forms of culture. Now, if we think about the Dalit political sphere, usually this is not a unified whole culture. There are multiple variants within this Dalit cultural spheres. So it can vary from one district to another district, one subcaste to another subcaste. And that's why, to understand a Dalit political culture, we have to emphasize and give a preface that it's a diverse expression of cultural forms. And when we understand that, then we will open ourselves to the possibilities. Usually what happened after Ambedkar, when the Dalit quote-unquote cultural movement came about, it was mostly literature, but through literature then there were poetry, and then there were theatres, and there were of course songs and Bhim Shahiri and all forms. I'm just talking in the Maharashtra context for now. What it did was, it gave a novel form surrounded around the life of Ambedkar, or Ambedkar's political movement, Ambedkar's radicalism. Within this radical project of Ambedkar, the politics of pre-Ambedkar did not necessarily exist. And that's why, if we look at the diversity of Dalit cultural sphere existed pre-Ambedkar, and it can exist without Ambedkar. Why? Because there are different forms that operate within this broader framework of politics. Post-Ambedkar Dalit cultural sphere has been, of course, been instrumental and monumental in describing what society is. It not only described, but it provided various theories to emphasize on the Dalit culture as a entree to understand Dalit society. But in addition to that, there were also class sensibilities that kind of came about, and we know the debate that happened between the urban, educated, middle class Dalits, or at least urban Dalits as opposed to non-urban Dalits, and the kind of Dalits that got recognized were mostly operating in the urban sphere, who went to universities, who went to colleges, who were actually writing in certain ways, who spoke in certain accents, got recognized, as opposed to the non-metro, non-city people. And this operates at every level. It need not be only Mumbai, Pune, but it could operate also on other level. For example, Aurangabad and Nanded, and those kind of spheres operates as a hierarchical segregation. Now, in the public consumption, one of the things is, especially through culture, that the cultural politics is so important, especially in the Dalit sphere, is because it is forthright and it is radical. It doesn't mince words. It doesn't say what to do, what not to do. What it effectively does is, it says the way it has to be said. and without any filters. It is critique of feudal, it is critique of your, they don't say, they don't use euphemisms. जिसको बोलना है वो वैसा मुंह पर बोल देते हैं. There is very little of a fear in that sphere. But in the Dalit performative cultures, for example, Shahiri or Powada or dance form, or also you can then think about the live shows that we have. If you are a Dalit and if you grew up in that Dalit upbringing, you get the signals, you get the messages what they are talking about. It's a sharp critique of Brahmins, sharp critique of Marathas, it's sharp critiques of all the oppressors who are oppressing you. Need not have only one benefit. It's also critique of Dalits who try to show off. So there is a whole sense of critiques, and a person who is not grown up with that experience will not understand the language, will not understand the message, and will have difficulty to decipher what the poet or what the singer or what the performer is trying to say. And I think this is very gets interesting where people then don't recognize this as an art form because they don't understand it. And because of their lack of understanding, it doesn't get recognized as a form that needs to be investigated, that needs to be researched, that needs to be academically emphasized. I think this has been the fate of the Dalit cultural sphere that it operates, especially in the anti-caste political sphere. Now, when culture, who is trying to emphasize the history as well as art and aesthetics of a society, converts into action, that's where cultural politics then becomes very essential. We need an action for that message to be then gone. And that's why Baba Saheb Ambedkar's whole lineage were themselves who were belonging to this tradition where cultural politics was prominent, be it Kabir or Ramanand Pant or even Mahanubhav Pant, across in some sections where these various quote-unquote sects exist in our society, and their emphasis always has been on culture. So for one to emulate a cultural politics, one needs to have an action-oriented direction, and that action-oriented direction was very effectively given by Mahatma Phule, because Mahatma Phule then went back into thinking about how to provide a political status for the struggle of people who belong to the non-Brahmin castes. And within that, the culture became a very essential, and that's why we see why he was so much invested in Shivaji Maharaj, because Shivaji was that non-Brahmin figure who could put the non-Brahmin caste on their feet and challenge the hegemony of the Peshwas, whose children still operate in this space. Now, to understand the Dalit discourse, we have to understand the cultural politics as being an essential aspect of Dalit life. If you understand that the cultural ways of operating are a part of what Dalits do in their everyday life, it's not that they go on stage and sing, doesn't mean they only do it on stage, they do it in their private life too. When they have jokes, when they have a certain food, when they have various cultures, it's not that they are doing for the public consumption, they are doing it for their own selfhood, to reclaim their own bodies. खुद को emphasize करने के लिए, खुद की body को claim करने के लिए वो लोग अपनी life में जी रहे हैं. अब अगर उसको stage में perform करो या ना करो, doesn't mean it is less of a culture. It is still a high culture that Dalits live in. And again, high and low kind of is a contradictory politics that continues to operate. But also, Dalit culture is primarily an intellectual project. Many people fail to understand that these people are not educated enough, and that's why the whole problem kind of comes enough. And I think scholars like Gopal Guru and many others have argued for the intellectualizing of this Dalit culture, because it has a lot to offer to our own issues. Now, this has been of the cultural politics, cultural movements, especially cultural revolutions. Now, how does cultural appropriation take place? I'm skipping the cultural terrorism part, and we can go towards the end as we put a closure in the next 10 minutes. The cultural appropriation is done by the people who have never produced anything in their life, because I will only appropriate something which I am incapable of producing. So when we produced a culture of public consumption, who will produce? The person who is living in the public, the person who is the public, not the person who is living in the big palaces, or not the person who is confined to temples. The person who is living in society is capable of producing a public culture. How can Brahmins then claim to be a producers of public culture? They never lived in public spaces. They never lived with people. They always created their own agraharas and they operated amongst themselves. A very tiny minority community then now is ironically now claiming to be the producer of a popular culture or a public culture. They cannot. What they did was, Brahmins are the best cheaters. They can copy anything for their advantage. And because of their sheer acumen to copy it so well, that they have been able to produce what we call Brahmin culture, and then it becomes Indian culture. How does it become Indian culture? Because it becomes Hindu culture. And I think that's how the appropriation politics of Brahmins continue to place its emphasis. Why do they do that? First is by declaring any Dalit art or any Shudra or any non-Brahmin art as dirty, as backward, and something that deserves to be condemned. And you know all of that. Why? Because you are called backward, you are called dirty, and you are condemned. That's how the Brahmins look at you. And then they do this by saying, this is not good enough. This is not universal enough. This is not challenging enough. In modern context, that happens, you are not smart enough. That means you are not meritorious enough. So these are all the historical purveyors, the historical legacies that they carry on in our current times. And so that's why the alternative culture or the Dalit culture, the mainstream public culture, then becomes a culture to be berated. And because of their hegemonic presence, many people start doubting their own self. But I think it's to the credit of Dalit art and artists, the cultural sphere, and the Dalit ancestors, your grandmothers and your parents, who have kept that Dalit cultural politics alive, because that is what belongs to you. That is the only space that you can reclaim your whole self. That's why when you go to a performance of Bhim Jayantis or any events, you will see that is your space. Nobody can take that away from you. You live your full self. You dance, you smoke, you drink, you enjoy that space because you want to claim on that space that belongs to you. No other space belongs, because that culture space is where love is shared, solidarity is shared, appreciation is shared, and we recognize each other that we are all oppressed. And that's why we are here, because we want to say, screw you, the Brahminical culture. Now, by declaring anything backward, how it can happen? Let's take example of Lavani in Maharashtra. Lavani was performed by Dalit women in the agrarian economy, where the people came yearly or biannually for the cattle trading or agrarian related fairs. Lavani was eventually an art of erotic, as they eventually declared, but it was a performance as well. It was a claiming of woman's body. The woman danced on her self-confidence that she could actually animate the entire fair, what we call exhibition, towards her, because when the performance was there, everybody, irrespective of the caste, would come and sit there to watch the performance of this woman, who would actually create a space for everybody to be involved in that act of performance. As we know, Apsara and all, these were all heavenly characterizations which didn't existed in its own imagination, but it did operated on the stage. And then of course there's the queer politics, where a gay man was given a respectable position who would perform, and of course the audience didn't treat the gay man with respect, but it had a status within the performance of Lavani. What happened to the Lavani? Lavani became vulgar. Lavani became dirty. Lavani became obscene. The erotic part of that was removed immediately. And I think what by doing that they did was, they desexualized Dalit women bodies. And because of Brahmin culture, the Dalits themselves also started treating eroticism as a wrong thing, as a vulgar thing, because they started to subsumed into the Brahminical ideology, they lost their own cultural inheritance. Within the excuse me, there is a question. Yes, exactly. So I think I will respond to some of these questions that are coming to after we finish this. So Lavani is just one example. We can see other forms of expressions wherein what we have done is we have not necessarily understood the art as well as the culture of Dalit that operated beyond the binaries of Brahmin and the Brahmin sacred and profane. We were operating in an independent sphere. No one has to be profane or sacred. It was just how we lived our life. We claim the purity of sexuality in its form. My friend Sharad is also here. He's asking, could you please throw some light as to how and when you guys... Sharad, I will come back to your question as I put this to a closure. So, by shunning any independent expression of Dalits, what Brahmins did was they appropriated it, and in 2000 or later, as we see when the cultural movie industry came, Lavani became the Brahmin women's best art, and Brahmin women were promoted as the best Lavani performers. Of course, still in the popular culture, there are still Dalit and other women who perform, but within the Brahmin sphere, in TV and all others, Brahmin women started to embrace themselves in its totality, and when they did that, they immediately granted a legitimacy to Lavani only performed by Brahmin women and not to the original crux of what it was, because when they talk about history, they talk about how vulgar it was and how dirty it was, and I think the whole dirtification and purification has been attached to the bodies of only Brahmins, and that's how it kind of comes to place. And I think by doing this, I would like to segue to my final point, which is the cultural appropriation via cultural terrorism. So by cultural appropriation, what it did was the various independent forms of what we have today called classic culture. That classic culture is actually originally Dalit culture. Dalits, for example, the history of Bharatnatyam, which has a Telugu. My friend is doing a research on that, and she has written PhD at University of Chicago. She has actually went back and looked at how the Dalit art was originally the form, and when Brahmins appropriated it, what they did was they made it a classical form, and what Dalits did was a dirty form, and it need not be accepted, and that's why they said it folk culture, as if Dalit are folk, which is people culture, and these are non-people culture. So Brahmins are animal culture, or what? Is I always kind of ask them, because they when they berate it, they don't give a significant legitimacy to this project. Now, the same has happened within Paraya in Tamil Nadu, or the same happens with the Mang communities in Maharashtra, where their own musical forms, their own musical instruments, their own unique engagement with that music instrument then gets appropriated and then used by some other arts. For example, in South India, especially in Tamil Nadu, the Carnatic music, T.M. Krishna has done research on that, and how he identified, because the Mridangam, for example, Mridangam is primarily an impure work, because it is the leather, it is the hide of a cattle. Who works with hide of cattle? It is the Dalit communities who tan it and then make an instrument out of it. It was through the working on ground inside the ruggedness of a society's apathy that they produced new forms of expression. But when Brahmin appropriates it, they make it a new form of Carnatic music by subsuming the Dalits and Adivasis, who were primarily contributors and originators of this tradition. Similarly, what happened in America, where rock and roll was originally created by black people, similarly blues was created by black people, white American culture appropriated it and then claimed it as their own American culture. Similarly, in India, the Dalit and Adivasi culture becomes like a culture of Indian culture by not giving us recognition what our ancestors have been doing. So we never hear the Dalit history of any of these art forms, because art forms, again, as I said, was not performed for the pleasure of the kings or monarchs. It was performed within the spheres of the people who were working on field, and they created it for their own purpose. They didn't create it for the performance of others. Eventually it became recognized, and it became a fact that people needed to understand. Now, Dalits have their own independent forms of music, their music tastes, their music instruments, their theatre, their poetry, their literary contributions, and I think what it does is it produces Dalits as a culturally novel community. And when we understand that as a cultural novelty, we give recognition to Dalit as someone who put their feet into the society's evolution, or you may call it reformation that was taking place, where Dalits were not just mute subjects; they were equal and rather co-participants of the cultural revival. Now, in today's context, when we go, you look at the forms of slogans we give in political parties, political protests. You listen to the form of shahiri that we give, that we perform. You pay attention to the, as I said, slogan and sloganeering, but also to the music that precedes the performance of any political rallies. So this Dalit culture has been, which is in its meta form, has always been existing alongside this. And within the post-Ambedkar sense, what happens is Buddhism becomes a cultural praxis for Dalits to perform, and Dalits to stay put on their own feet. My final point as I depart is that I had argued in my book Caste Matters that the Dalits are having its Harlem moment, wherein I look at the various forms of new cultures, the filmmaking, the new recognition that we are getting, which is not sudden outcome, which has been a legacy of more than 100 years, where this kind of sphere was carried out. The current generation is benefiting, or rather reaping, the sacrifices and the great work of our preceding generation, who had actually laid a solid foundation of a cultural expression in its form. And the Dalit Renaissance that operates right now is actually getting its recognition. So doesn't mean Dalit art was not existing before. It's only now that they are writing, they are expressing, they are performing in a space where even international community is taking recognition, is giving their due course. And that's why we have Dalit rap, again modernizing and hybridizing its own new forms, and coping with the new forms of musicalities, but also the culture of oral storytelling, which becomes the center of Dalit cultural sphere, where intellectual return, non-return, archives, non-archives, inventories of historical research don't exist, because it is an oral tradition. And I think oral tradition, the value of oral tradition is being so pure that it has granted a certain legitimacy in its form. And we can see every Dalit struggle, there are stories that always conflict with the Brahmin, but conflict the Dalit pride in that, because they root, or they put their placing into expressing of this, they themselves as something that is uber individual, or something that is not lesser than human but more than human, which is, we can perform, and there is this pomposity that operates in this. And I think this is how we see the various local customs that are existing, the various temples that are existing, the various they call yatras, where people go for their own devotional practices. This is all outcome of a non-Brahmin, mostly Dalit cultural sphere, where people go and worship, and many gods who are rooted with the working class gods are actually the Dalit gods who were their ancestors. But eventually Brahmins, of course, we can see the Pandharpur temple, for example, becomes this example. But again, like Pandharpur, there are many temples across India where each individual deities are performed. And I think this is an outcome of how a cultural politics of an anti-caste movement takes its cue, and informs to the world about their own self-importance, and as well as their own recognition and dignity in the space which otherwise never recognizes them. Thank you. Now I think it's a question time. Um, I should take the questions. So let me go at the first. Is there any question? Uh, okay, let's go with Sharat's question then. Uh, I think it's a very interesting question, and I think one needs to. Yeah, I will go with other questions. Let's start with Sharat's. You know, what Sharat is asking is how the egalitarian culture uh, is actually constituting the individual consciousness, because this individual consciousness, then he says, and which then becomes an essential requisite for establishing democratic order. So there are three layers in this. One is existence and constitution of egalitarian culture. Then this culture giving a rise to something what we call individual, where I become important and my rights become important. Of course, this is where the even modern constitutions talk about the individual as a central. And then this individual then constitutes democratic order. Now let's change this. If there is an inegalitarian culture, if there is a culture that only promotes hierarchy and that promotes the non-recognition of the working classes labor, or the non-recognition of the individual agency, what it does is it produces friction, and by in the friction it produces a constant contestation in every process. And because there is a contestation in every process, what it does is, as long as we want to establish an individual consciousness, what it does is, and this is where we can talk about Du Bois as double consciousness. It produces a double consciousness. One is the consciousness of the ruler, and one is the consciousness of the ruled. For me, and I had critiqued that elsewhere, that it becomes double unconsciousness, because if you have two contestating cultures, especially looking through the Dalit sphere, the consciousness is not something that is given, that is constantly building, but this constitution is building through the unconsciousness of self. Matlab, when you are establishing your own historical depth, you have nothing to look at to claim that belongs to you. There is no, as I've said, there is no written records as explicitly as one would imagine, but I'm sure we have yet to do enough research into archaeological and anthropological historical research where we can perhaps find some written or some material of a form. But the unconsciousness then becomes a tragedy of entire Dalit masses. And I think that unconsciousness is what is playing at the part of Dalits losing their political space, their own, they become insecure about their own self. They don't pronounce anything, they don't proudly claim, because when they go into quote unquote high culture spaces or urban middle class spaces, what they do is they try to subsume themselves. They try to immediately say that they disown themselves, and I think this is because of the unconsciousness. Unconsciousness is not their fault; it is to the fault of a lack of education, but also lack of repositories to look at. But now let's see how then this unconsciousness becomes an unmaking of a democratic charter. Because if you are belonging in an unconscious citizenry, you always relieve yourself into relying on someone else. And when you're relying on someone else, you don't become totally democratic, because you're always looking for the patronizing pittance. Someone else would provide for your own welfare. And I think these dynamics then is very essential for us to then have a democratic order in society. We really need to establish what are egalitarianisms of certain culture. And I think Brahminical culture has never been egalitarian. So what is egalitarian? The egalitarian culture is of the oppressed people, the Dalits, the Adivasis and other oppressed groups who produced culture for the people where they were just not indices into the programmatic manifestation of one's being in society, but they were leaving that to reclaim their self as individual being. And that's why I think the Dalit or the non-Brahmin cultural sphere is the space for all of us to establish a democratic order. And Ambedkar argues that it could be a Buddhist order, some people could say it could be a Bhakti order, but there is that constitutes an economic, a democratic ecological order. So Prajak Wagmare asks for the sexual revolution, and I mean, I just wrote a piece for a magazine which I will happily share with you guys, where in India we need a solid sexual revolution. I think it's the separation of sexuality, and separation of sexuality comes from repressing the desire. And why do you want to repress desire? Because you don't want mixing of bloods, you don't want mixing of fluids. And how do you do that? And why do you don't want to mix the fluids? Because it's endogamy. You want to maintain the caste system. And so when people say we would like to get rid of caste system, one of my things is, let's have a sexualized revolution, meaning let's not confine and let's not keep sex as an act of profanity, because it is only celebrated when the parents approve of it or the society approve of it. Why not the individual who is taking into the sexual activity enjoy it? And because of this lack of sexual revolution, what happens is we give rise to heterosexual attitudes in our society. We don't give alternative approaches for people to be homosexual, be lesbian, be transgender, be asexual, or any of that form, because individual value is then surrendered to the hegemonic culture, and Brahminic culture never be egalitarian, as we said, and that's why we need to reimagine how sexuality and sexual politics takes place. Many times people say, if we open, and this is where I have a conversation, won't there be like a lot of pregnancies of women? And that's why they always put a question on women's sexuality as to, but these people who tell me are mostly more males. We have never asked females how would they like it to be, And sexual revolution is of course, we have to pay attention to female desires because our patriarchy has oppressed them more, but also we have to pay attention to the male desires. And when we try to create a condition on this, one of the ways is to then challenge the caste system that is predicated on endogamous forms of relations, because they are more concerned about the next child will become a bastard of a caste society. And I think a sexual revolution of freedom of one's choices, if it is brought about, then we will have a more kind of effective dialogue. Now, people might say it could be a potential problem in a society that is confined with tradition, but yes, that's the problem. If we want to get rid of a rigid society, we need to get rid of the dynamics that gives or that confines the youth desires. And that's why we see there are many rapes happening in society. Many sexually frustrated youth are then utilized by the right-wing forces to be then the next machoist who will impose violence, because their sexual energies, the youthful energies, need to be diverted somewhere. What do they divert? Then they are diverted to kill Muslims, kill Dalits, attack Christians, and all kinds of things. And then these people then become patriarchal heads because they are not given an alternative approach. To challenge Brahminism, according to me, is to indulge in a sexual revolution of a society that will give recognition to the desires and practices of individual, whatever caste, whatever gender, whatever it may believe. We need to embrace that. Sadly, because we live in a Brahminic domination, the sexually liberated communities who have Dalits and Adivasis are also now forced into practicing this form of conservative sexual practices, and I think that's why again then the whole problem is again arising within the subcaste marriages and all kinds of things that we know. Sonali Muske is asking, Black Saurit, I think that's a good question. Yes, so Sonali's question is, I think she asked in Marathi. Maybe I should respond in Hindi because maybe the audience would like to know in Hindi. So आपने कहा है कि ब्लैक मूवमेंट ने एक स्ट्रॉन्ग कल्चरल एक ऑप्शन दिया था, वैसा दलित मूवमेंट ने क्यों नहीं दिया, ऐसा और क्यों नहीं दिख रहा है ऐसा दिख. सो बुद्धिज़्म तो एक ऑल्टरनेटिव है कल्चरल, बट वो स्वीकार नहीं किया जाता है. क्योंकि बुद्धिज़्म का जो इंटरप्रिटेशन है, जो बाबा साहब ने मास कल्चर के लिए बुद्धिज़्म दिया था, वो बुद्धिज़्म हमारे तक अभी तक पहुंचा नहीं है। क्योंकि हमारा बुद्धिज़्म अभी भी जो है वो दो भागों में बटा हुआ है, एक तो एलिट बुद्धिज़्म और दूसरा है सुपरस्टिशियस बुद्धिज़्म। और एलिट बुद्धिज़्म जो है, जो 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 मिडिल क्लास दलित समाजी जो बुद्धिस्ट हो गया है, वो खुद को दलित समाज से जोड़ता नहीं है, वो खुद को बुद्धिस्ट कहता है और बुद्धिस्ट ही इसमें है, वो जीना चाहता है। तो उसकी जो गैदरिंग वगैरह होती है वो प्राइमरीली अन्य दलित समाज से दूर रहना ही उसका एक बुद्धिस्ट का वर्च्यू बन जाता है। और फिर उसके जो बुद्धिस्ट के जो वैल्यूज़ है वो खुद के लेवल पर वो ये नहीं करता है, इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं करता है, बट दूसरों को इम्प्लीमेंट करने लगाता है। और दूसरा जो है वो सुपरस्टिशियस बुद्धिज़्म। अब इसमें आप देखो, सुपरस्टिशियस बुद्धिज़्म जो है, हमको मुझे लगता है थोड़ा एक दो और जनरेशन लगेंगी, मेरे हिसाब से ज़्यादा ही लगेंगी टू गेट टोटली ऑन ग्रिप्स। क्योंकि जब कभी भी नया धर्म आता है, बाबा साहब का जो बुद्धिज़्म था वो एक नया धर्म है, उसको जब हम एक सोशल अल्टरनेटिव की तरह से देखते हैं तो उसको टाइम लगता है मैच्योर होने के लिए। उसके लिए हमको जो लोकल कल्चरल्स है हमारे, उससे हमको उसको एट्यून करना होगा, नहीं तो फिर। और बाबा साहब ने बहुत अच्छा तरीके से किया बुद्धिज़्म को। बाबा साहब ने बताया कि इट वॉज अ दलित कल्चर एंड सो यू हैव टू जस्ट नाउ थिंक अबाउट हाउ इट ऑपरेटेड ऑन अ नॉन ब्राह्मणिकल लेंस। तो जो ब्लैक मूवमेंट ने जो दिया, वैसा बुद्धिज़्म और दलित मूवमेंट इसके लिए नहीं दे रही। मुझे लगता है उसके अंदर जो क्लास कॉन्शियसनेस है वो अभी तक उतना ज़्यादा इफेक्टिवली नहीं हुआ है। ऐसा नहीं है कि नहीं है, ऑलरेडी है, बट एक लेवल पे जो मिडिल क्लास बन गए हैं वो मिडिल क्लास स्टेटस में ही जीना चाहते हैं, और जो लोअर क्लासेस के लोग हैं उनसे वो ज़्यादा रिलेशन नहीं रखना चाहते ना। मैं ये सब की बात नहीं कह रहा हूँ, मैं कल्चरल डिस्कोर्स की बात कर रहा हूँ। इंडिविजुअल लेवल पर, सोसाइटल लेवल पर, ऑर्गेनाइजेशन लेवल पर ये अलग तरीके से हो सकता है और हो भी रहा है, ऐसा मैं कहता हूँ। बट ये जो डायकोटोमी तैयार हो गई है, मुझे लगता है दैट इज़ वन ऑफ द रीज़न। बट देन अगेन आप अपने अनुभव में भी देख सकते हैं कि बुद्धिज़्म की वैल्यूएशन और डिवैल्यूएशन कितनी हो चुकी है। डॉक्टर नम्रता खोबरागड़े ने सवाल पूछा है कि हिंदुइज्म रेलिगेटेड वुमेन टू एन इंफीरियर स्टेटस एंड द कल्चरल टेक्स्ट आर अलाइव इन सोसाइटी दैट वेरी गुड दैट वर्क अगेंस्ट द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ वुमेन। देखिए, मुझे लगता है औरतों का जो अलाइशिप है वो औरत है, ऐसा मुझे लगता है। आई अंडरस्टैंड कि उधर रेस, क्लास, कास्ट के डिफरेंसेस हैं, बट एक ब्रॉडर पॉलिटिकल के हिसाब से अगर हम इसको देखने का प्रयास करें तो हमको ये समझ में आएगा कि द वुमेन ऑफ वेरियस कास्ट need to understand that they are Shudras in the Brahminical fold. So the Brahmin woman is still an impure individual in the family. She still needs to be protected. Her sexuality needs to be conditioned. So she is oppressed in her family too. So that job needs to be done by the dominant caste woman, because they don't see their oppression as their oppression. They relate their oppression with the oppression of a Dalit woman and they feel good about it. But I think the allyship between the various women, I would feel, could exist, but that could also be a fanciful idea. That could also be, we are expecting too much from, we should do. I'm not saying we should divert our attention by only focusing on other women to solve it. We should create our own spaces, and other women who believe in your struggle could join. But I don't think we are on our own right now. We have a solid space within the Dalit women categories, Dalit women framings, and various categories of solidarities are actually, and I think sidelining with them, they are promoting them, and I think they are with them. So believe it or not, it's in a way it's a quite a positive space. But again, the problems are manifold, and can we resolve that in one in some magic code? I don't think so. I think the solidarity has to constantly need to be revisited and renegotiated for us to then provide a new framework. थ्रू सांस्कृतिक मूवमेंट और बुद्धिजीवी वर्ग के बीच में कोई संघर्ष है क्या? मुझे लगता है ये दोनों एक ही हो सकते हैं, क्योंकि जो कल्चरल मूवमेंट चला रहे हैं वो इंटेलेक्चुअल मूवमेंट भी इंटेलेक्चुअल क्लास ही है एक तरीके से, बट वो इंटेलेक्चुअल क्लास जिसको हम कह रहे हैं वो मैं सैलरीड क्लास या प्रोफेशनल क्लास की नहीं, मैं जिसको सैलरीड हिपोक्रेट कहता हूँ वो नहीं। मेरा कहना है जो सांस्कृतिक मूवमेंट चला रहा है वो खुद एक इंटेलेक्चुअल क्लास है, और वो खुद नए थियरीज रोज़ लिख रहा है, नए प्रैक्टिसेस कर रहा है, और मुझे लगता है कि उसको उस तरीके से हमको देखना चाहिए। अगर आप उसको ये कंपेयर करें कि जो सैलरीड हिपोक्रेट क्लास है उससे संघर्ष है, बिल्कुल है। क्यों है? क्योंकि क्लास कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स है, क्लास इंटरेस्ट अलग है, और उनके जो व्यूज़ है वो अलग तरीके से, उनका लिबरेशन का देखने का तरीका कुछ और हो सकता है, और सांस्कृतिक मूवमेंट वालों का कुछ और हो सकता है। उसके लिए वो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स, कॉन्ट्रडिक्शंस हमेशा साथ में रह सकती है। तो फूड डिस्कोर्स पर बलिराम पाइकराव ने पूछा है सवाल। देखिए, फूड कल्चर के ऊपर मेरा ज़्यादा अध्ययन नहीं है, जितना मेरा वेरी लिमिटेड रीडिंग है उसके ऊपर मैं एक जरूर बताऊंगा कि विद इन दलित कल्चरल स्फीयर जो फूड कल्चर है ये एक बहुत बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट एसेंशियल एलिमेंट है। हमारे जो रिसर्चर्स हैं उन्होंने अब तक इसके ऊपर ज़्यादा रिसर्च नहीं किया है। दे हैव नॉट डन इनफ रिसर्च टू अंडरस्टैंड हाउ द दलित फूड कल्चर operates in this broader framework, क्योंकि हमारे पास जो फूड कल्चर है उसका टेस्ट अलग है, उसके स्पाइसेस अलग है, वो खाने का बनाने का तरीका अलग है, क्योंकि हमारा जो खाना बना है वो एबंडेंस से नहीं बना है, हमारे पास था लिमिटेड खाना। सो लिमिटेड खाने से हमने हमारी क्यूजिन तैयार की है। डेड एनिमल्स खाते थे, we would consume plants, and that were created by our own selves. So there was a very special relationship between what we ate, because that is what we cultivated. अगर चावल खा रहे हैं, अगर हम गेहूँ खा रहे हैं, या वट एवर जो भी खा रहे हैं, फल खा रहे हैं, हमारा उससे रिलेशन इसके लिए क्योंकि हमने वो बनाया है। आज जब हम देखते हैं कि हम सुपरमार्केट में, दुकान में जाकर जब मिलते हैं, हमारा रिलेशन थोड़ा सा कम होता है क्योंकि हमने नहीं बनाया है वो। बट हिस्टोरिकली देखा जाए तो फूड कल्चर प्रैक्टिसेस आर डेवलप थ्रू द इंटीमेट रिलेशन बिटवीन प्रोडक्शन एंड कंजम्पशन। कंजम्पशन यानी खाना, और प्रोडक्शन हमने जो प्रोड्यूस किया है। जानवरों का भी ये था, लेफ्ट आउट था, डेड एनिमल्स द कैरियन था, वो खाने की जरूरत थी, वो खाने का जबरदस्ती था। सो वी क्रिएटेड न्यू क्यूजिन आउट ऑफ दैट। बीफ जर्की जो अभी इधर है, हमने बहुत साल पहले बनाई है। जब जानवर मरता था, बैल या गाय, तो पूरा महारवाड़ा या मांगवाड़ा या ये जाते थे और काटते थे, और छोटे छोटे जो भी एसेंशियल जो भी मिलते थे, गुर्दे हो या जो भी हो, उसका उन्होंने उसका उन्होंने ये तैयार किया है, पैलेट तैयार किया है। अभी मिडिल क्लास दलितों का तकलीफ क्या हो जाती है, मिडिल क्लास दलित जो है वो इस डर में रहता है कि अभी हम बुद्धिस्ट बन गए हैं, या अभी हम अपर क्लास बन गए हैं, तो हम मीट नहीं खा सकते। शरण कुमार लिम्बाड़े ने उनकी जो ऑटोबायोग्राफी में लिखा कि जब वो खाना चाहते थे, वो चुप चुप के खाते थे, क्योंकि तुम्हारा फूड कल्चर ही तुमसे छीना जाता है, यानी तुम्हारी आइडेंटिटी तुम्हारे से छीनी जाती है। तो व्हाट हैपेंस इज इट्स वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग कि जैसा आज के संडे में मटन ये फेवरेट है महारों का, स्पेशली आई टॉक अबाउट महार, बट देयर आल्सो अदर कम्युनिटीज हु लाइक वेरियस काइंड्स ऑफ मीट। हमारे अंदर जो वाल्मीकि समाज के लोग हैं, दे लाइक बीफ, महारों को भी फेवरेट बीफ है, बिकॉज हिस्टोरिकली ये लोग ही खाते थे। तो उनके अलग अलग क्यूजिन बनाने के बहुत अलग अलग तरीके हैं, जैसा कौन से मसाले यूज़ करने हैं, या फिर किस तरह से ड्राई करके खाना है। जैसा अभी क्योंकि अब वो जानवर तो रोज़ मरेगा नहीं, तो कितने दिन हाउ टू कंज्यूम, फ्रीज तो नहीं है, तो उसके लिए उन्होंने फिर उसके स्ट्राइप्स बना के उसको धूप में सुखाया, और अपने जो ग्राउंड स्पाइसेस जिसको हम कहते हैं, वो खुद उन्होंने अंदर अपने घर के अंदर बनाए, एंड देन उसके ऊपर उन्होंने उसका एक नया स्नैक तैयार करके उन्होंने इवेंचुअली कंज्यूम किया। सो आई थिंक दिस इज अ रिसर्च दैट वी नीड टू डू, क्योंकि हमारे पास जो है क्लास कॉन्शियसनेस और एक कास्ट कॉन्शियसनेस इतना ज़्यादा हो गया कि लोग कहते हैं कि अभी हम सिर्फ चिकन ही खाते हैं, हम मटन ही खाते हैं, हम ज़्यादा जानवर नहीं खाते। उनको क्या पता कितने कितने जानवर तुम्हारे एंसेस्टर्स खा चुके हैं। घोरबड, मुझे पता, वो कैमिलियन या लिजर्ड जो थी वो बड़ा फेवरेट क्यूजिन था। फिर वो जो पंछी रहते, वो पंछियों को मार के खाते थे, आज भी खाते हैं हमारे समाज के लोग जो गाँव इसमें हैं। फिर उसके बाद में जो सांप खाते थे. सो दीज आर वेरियस काइंड्स ऑफ एनिमल्स दैट वर कंज्यूम. चूहे खाते हैं, आज भी खाते हैं चूहे, बिकॉज दे हैव देयर ओन यू नो, they developed out of all of this, you know. चूहों के साथ रहोगे, उधर ही है, आसपास है. तो so this is the new kind of cuisine culture kind of developed around this. फाइनल 2 सवाल लेंगे. मैं यशवंत ने सवाल पूछा है कि हाउ डू वी बिल्ड क्रिटिकल कल्चरल कॉन्शियसनेस अमंग नॉन दलित स्पेशली अमंग ओबीसी. बहुत बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट सवाल पूछा है यशवंत ने. शोगुन गायकवाड ने पूछा है हाउ टू डी ब्राह्मनाइज एंड रेडिकलाइज ब्राह्मनाइज SC ST एंड OBC स्पेशली OBC कैन सोशल मीडिया. हाँ शोगुन, मैं पहले आपको, हाँ यार, अगर आपको इफ़ यू कैन ब्लडी यूज दिस सोशल मीडिया टू योर एडवांटेज, क्रिएट मीम्स, create all kinds of, see, whatever you can create, because that's what you did. Your ancestors were good at creating something. It could be creation of a different culture, it could be creation of something else, but never lose out the sight of creation. And create in a way anything that you feel that would convey the mass. How do we de-Brahmanize? I think we should de-Brahmanize by constantly offering a honest critique. You know, an honest critique goes a long way, and tell them, but it should also not be like disassociating ourselves from the people who are Brahmanized Dalits. We should embrace them because they are arrested into that culture because of they have very limited avenues of expression. They don't know what more to do, and that's why, you know, we need to find an option into that spaces. Yes, I'm answering to you now. See, I think the OBC itself is tied to, going back to the question, is tied to the mythical future. Why does OBC believe in Brahminism? Because he or she think they can be Brahmins, or they can be equivalent of Brahmins. For example, the many Marathas that we have in Maharashtra, originally these people now claim to the legacy of a certain order of history, and especially through Shivaji's reign, they try to relate themselves because, you know, but then they don't understand that Shivaji himself was not the Maratha that they are today. He was a subaltern. He came, you know, and he had a very mixed background, right? And his ancestors were heavy followers of Sufi Islam. That's why we have the names like Shah, and his other uncle was another named after some Sufi. I'm just giving an example of Maratha through OBCs, but also we have the other OBCs castes. They live with they live on two things. One is they are afraid of Dalits. They are afraid of Dalits, that they think that Dalits will go ahead of them, and they know that because historically, whenever Dalits were given chance, they went ahead, and that's why they become more Hinduized or Brahminized in their formations. But how then you know, how shall we then inject the prophecy of egalitarianism or the consciousness of a certain order through culture? I think we need to tell them that we should first ask them the question, what is your culture? Explain to us. Is there any musical form? Is there specific cuisine? Is there any songs? Is there any gods that you worship? When we go and ask them, you will realize these are all non-Brahmin gods. They're non-Brahmin saints and nobody, you know. Eventually what happened is they started adopting Brahmin saints. See, because the Bhakti movement brought a Dalit or OBC saints to the front, Brahmins needed their own saints, and that's why they started injecting their own saints, and that's why we have that some Swamis with various names that operate, and Brahmins they worship them, but it's ironical and it's rather sad that the Dalits and OBCs also worship them, mostly OBCs. To build a critical consciousness, we have to affirm them that if they become anti-Brahminical, they will have a space that they can grow. But if they assume or try to be like or devote themselves to the Brahminical project, they will never be equal, even if they try their best. They might be given access here and there, 1 or 2 tokens might be given access, but on larger front they will not be. They will never be egalitarian. But on the contrary, if you look through the subaltern non-Brahmin sphere, OBCs have gotten the respect that they deserve, and that's why we see Shivaji is one of the example, but Mahatma Phule also becomes heavily adopted by the people because they believed in the culture of of the poor people, of the Dalit sphere, or the liberation of these people. Now, tell me how many OBCs people know to the level of Mahatma Phule, but who are Brahmanized OBCs, and how much of their acceptance is still valid? How much of them are still accepted? And I think we will have a very I don't know any particular names, but that's what I'm talking about. That if you operate in their space, you will subsume, you will die as nobody. You will die as another bloody peasant or another bloody carpenter or any other job that the caste system or any other barber. But for example, if you take the example of Dhobi, Dhobis are somewhere SCs and somewhere they're OBCs, but in Maharashtra they're OBCs. And within the Gadge Baba realm, he's widely accepted. Now tell me how many Dhobis we know apart from Gadge Baba across India. Because see, this guy operated in Maharashtra, but because he worked for the liberation of people who belong to all this oppressed castes, he became all India figure and he became accepted. So that's where the egalitarian space operates within the Dalit and the political sphere. I think Amol Kharat has this question. सांस्कृतिक लढा स्ट्रॉंग करण्यासाठी परिवर्तनवादी चळवळीने कशा प्रकारे लढलं पाहिजे. सांस्कृतिक जो मूवमेंट है उसको स्ट्रॉन्ग करने के लिए जो प्रोग्रेसिव मूवमेंट है, जो रेवोल्यूशनरी मूवमेंट है, वो देखिए मुझे लगता है कि दलित जो परफॉर्मेटी है उसको दलित परफॉर्मेटी करके एक्सेप्ट करो. क्योंकि जब फॉर एग्जांपल जो लेफ्ट मूवमेंट थी वो दलित आर्ट को तो इन्वॉल्व की. जैसा तेलंगाना मूवमेंट में जो आर्टिस्ट थे पूरे दलित थे, मेजॉरिटी ऑफ देम, या दलित इंस्पायर्ड आर्ट था वो, है ना. जैसा अभी यहाँ पर मेरी एक दोस्त ऑनलाइन आई है, उसने मुझे फॉरवर्ड किया था तेलुगु आर्काइव. तो उस तेलुगु आर्काइव में यू विल नोटिस कि जो ओरल ट्रेडिशन है तेलंगाना का, जो तेलंगाना मूवमेंट शुरू हो गई थी 1930s से मोस्टली, वो 1940s में जब उसको डायरेक्शन मिला, जिसमें दलित आर्टिस्ट जो गांव में जाकर ये परफॉर्म किया. बट लेफ्ट डिस्कोर्स में दलित आर्ट को दलित आर्ट करके एक्सेप्ट नहीं किया जाता है. इट इज़ एक्सेप्टेड समथिंग एल्स. तो वो लेफ्ट आर्ट बन गया, वो इंडियन कम्युनिस्ट आर्ट बन गया. Why is that obsession? Why is that fear of giving away the original crux of Dalit being? So we have to understand that Dalit art anywhere in the sphere needs to be acknowledged as Dalit art, and that's why progressive movement को वो दलित आर्ट करके ही प्रमोट करना चाहिए. या जो भी कल्चर उनकी कास्ट या जो भी however they want to identify, but their caste identity needs to be emphasized when it comes to the cultural movement, because as I said, cultural movement gives more reasons for one to declare oneself as an autonomous being without relying on anyone else, and gives a radical consciousness of liberation. I think we have spoken for almost 2 hours. Thank you everybody for coming online. It was great being with you. आपके साथ यहाँ पर बात करके मुझे बड़ा आनंद हुआ. और मेरे जो हमारे साथी हैं जिन्होंने ऑर्गेनाइज़ किया, सभी साथियों को मेरी तरफ से धन्यवाद. और वो अपनी मूवमेंट चालू रखें, उनकी मूवमेंट की बहुत ज़रूरत है. और इसी तरह की जो विचार हैं, जो फुले शाहू अम्बेडकर विचारों से चलते हैं, बट केवल उन तक ना रुकते हुए अन्य विचारों का भी जो स्वीकार करते हैं, जो परिवर्तनवादी है, चाहे फिर वो मार्क्स हो, चाहे फिर वो चोखा मेड़ा हो, चाहे फिर वो नंदनार हो, चाहे फिर वो शिवाजी महाराज हो, चाहे फिर वो असीमानंद हो, चाहे वो कांशीराम हो, चाहे वो अन्य प्रकार के जो अन्य विचारवंत हैं रेवोल्यूशनरी जो उनके विचार. मुझे लगता है एक लिबरल अप्रोच चाहिए रेवोल्यूशनरी मूवमेंट में, कि एक विचार को ही लेकर अगर हम चलेंगे बहुत अच्छी बात है, बट एक विचार जो रहता है, एक विचार के साथ साथ हमको अन्य विचारों की भी ज़रूरत होती है. क्योंकि एक विचार का जो है वो एक सोचना सिखाता है. तो अगर हम ज़्यादा विचारों का एक्सेप्टेंस करें, ज़्यादा विचारों को अगर हम देखें, अगर हम सोचें, तो मुझे लगता है कि एक नई तरीके से हमको इस चीज़ों को देखना होगा. इसी से मैं उन्हीं विचारों से मैं भी प्रेरणा लेता हूँ. अलग अलग विचार हैं, और विचारों का क्या होता है, विचारों का घर नहीं होता है. विचार हमेशा घर बदलते रहते हैं, तो आप भी उस विचारों का स्वीकार करो। और जहाँ पर आपको ठीक लगे, जैसा कबीर की भी वाणी है कि जहाँ तक आप जा सके जाओ और जहाँ रुक सके रुको, बट ये मत करो कि अब तक जो हुआ वो तुम्हारे लिए एक हानिकारक था। उसके अच्छी भी चीज़ें होती हैं। तो इसी के चलते मैं आप सब से विदा लेता हूँ। आपका सब लोगों का धन्यवाद। जय भीम।